played a huge role in the big Collision in Korea events. This is kind of everyone talks about the Collision in Korea events when they're talking about the history of WCW. So I'm wondering if you could go into the whole detail of how they were set up and what it was like there, and the various issues that happened with some of the wrestlers and other talent.
Yeah, there's we can go. There's 4 hours.
About it.
Yeah, there's a 4 hours movie on that deal. First of all, Antonio Inoki had reached out to Brad Riggins and Eric Bischoff because to work a. By the way, Antonio Inoki was a member of a diet. He was like a senator over there in Japan at the time, and pretty big politician. He reached out to Eric to get in contact with Muhammad Ali, and this was certainly before I was on front of camera talent. Eric made that happen. I think in Denver we had a matter of fact I have a photograph here somewhere. I had a picture with Muhammad Ali and Antonio Inoki, and Muhammad Ali is one of my heroes. With all the stuff he went through, so I got to meet him. Eric put this deal together, and throughout that, Antonio Inoki was working on this peace festival and having this event in North Korea. Now, let me tell you how that kind of comes about with Japanese pro wrestling, and you got to kind of go back in history. Made the one of the most famous wrestler in Japan in professional wrestling history is Rikidozan, who was Korean born, who changed his name in Japanese and became one of the father of professional wrestling in Japan. So here's Rikidozan, Giant Baba, Antonio Inoki, and these people come underneath that, the family tree per se, or pro wrestling tree in Japan. And so with Rikidozan being born in North Korea, and Antonio Inoki being professional wrestler / member of a diet, was trying to create this peace festival to bring professional wrestling to North Korea. Mind you, this is way before, right? Rodman and, but another gentleman that I got to know through wrestling. So as this Muhammad Ali meeting happens, and Antonio Inoki mentions, we're doing this peace festival, maybe you can join us to North Korea. And so originally it was New Japan Pro Wrestling guys going to North Korea for this peace festival. And because some of the talent, and because we had a talent exchange program, people who was working for New Japan at the time, the Steiners, and World Warrior Hawk, and those guys was going to go to that show. I got invited, and Eric Bischoff and I got invited. Akira Hokuto was there, and Eric says, "Well, we're going to. You want to go to North Korea?" Yeah, I never been there, and knowing that it's kind of forbidden place to go, certainly as a U.S. citizen and certainly a Japanese citizen. And I got a few calls from the government official telling me that he says, "Hey, we don't want you to go. If you go, we can't guarantee your safety." But in '86 I was in South Africa when there was still apartheid, and they told me the same thing back then. So yeah, we go. So I mean, we whether it was young and foolish, well, I wasn't that young, but it was an experience that we certainly not going to get another chance. So we went, and it was quite the trip, and I can go on and on about that experience. We got on a plane, and I'll do a short version of this. So we got on a plane in Nagoya, and it was a North Korean plane, and it was one of those DC-9, looked like a fixed wing plane. You know what I'm talking about? And I was fortunate enough to sit up front, which is considered, I'm sure, it was a first class. But mind you, we're talking about North Korean plane, and I remember flight took a while, but I remember the flight attendant came by and said something that we couldn't really understand. And it was really, you got to understand the contrast. We're flying first class on Japan Airline on 747 from United States to Japan, and then we got to get on this DC-10, And I remember planes start to rub up and we're going to take off, and I guess all of us used to put on a seatbelt. Some of the seat didn't have a seatbelt. So it was kind of, that's one of the things I remember.
No, we interviewed Scorpio, and he told us that he got into a fight with Hawk.
I was there too.
Can you tell us your version about
that? Well, we're kind of cooped up in the country, right? First of all, everybody's, especially the American boys, all freaking out because we're flying in and we see the skyscrapers. And, they're actually flying us around the Capitol, so we all see it, right? A lot of things was, propaganda. They want us to see a lot of things that, they want us to see what they want to show us. And there was famine going on to North Korea at the time. So we're flying to the city, and there's like an 8-lane highway coming out of the city, right? And we're flying, and we see like clay, like not a lot of green, and we see the highway in the middle of the day, but we don't see any cars. So I'm going, wow, So that's kind of first impression. We fly in. First thing they do is they take our passport. So you can imagine all the boys are coming up to me because I was kind of Japanese, their liaison for a foreign trip, and they're all going like, "Where's I need my passport." And I remember Ric Flair just freaking out, and basically, my answer was, "Yeah, they took my passport too, but even if you had your passport, where are you going? We got communist China to the north. We have DMZ to the south. There's no way out of here unless they let us out." So, like what they told us, and New Japan official told us, before we left, you got to be at your best behavior. And apparently Scott Norton forgot about that memo that he got for that one. Cause I'll tell you that incident in a minute here. But, so getting in and to answer your question about Scorpio and Hawk, Hawk, a little hothead anyway. So we talked about him and Randy, and so somehow he was, he didn't mince any words, and I kind of got an idea because I don't know for sure. I don't want to mention it, but why they had a heat between them, but anyway. Both being athletes and both being pretty buffed and they're pretty tough guys, and word got a little heated, and did they get into it in a bus? There was a porta part, and I do remember that, but not knowing what all the detail was. But I remember Eric telling those guys, says, "Listen, we're in North Korea. Only way we can get out of here is that they let us out." To give you an idea about Scott Norton wanted to call home. I obviously wanted to call his wife, actually. But and the only way you can make a phone call out of North Korea, and they told us, right? I mean, they told us that everything you do once we land, somebody's watching you. They're listening to you. So be at your best behavior, And mind you, they're giving us their best that they have to offer. But their best they have to offer is, nothing like you used to in Japan or in certainly in the United States, And food, foods are, at best, and they're giving us their best. But, we're not getting, there's a famine going on. We're not getting, prime ribs here, And
didn't Scott Steiner throw a piece of food across the room or something? At one
no,
point?
what happened was they had this big Korean barbecue thing going on in a park. This beautiful park, and the food that they was cooking was a stringy, something that resembled meat, looked like a little gristle thing, and and I don't know if it was Scott. I think it was Scott. I'm not sure, but we're outdoors and there's people walking around smelling the barbecue. Whether it's a gristle or what, it still smells good, right? Especially if you haven't had a meat for probably a couple of years. And I think he kind of tossed one of the meat because he didn't like it, and I think it was his brother that said, "Hey, that's probably not very good. These people haven't had a food." I think kind of smartened him up on that. And what happened to Scott Norton was that he wanted to call home. So in order for you to make a phone call, you get on and they call the operator, and the operator calls China. You give them the number in China, because that's the only people they had a connection with, and they will call you back. They will ring you back, and it's like going back in time. So Scott gets on the phone in his hotel room and started, forgot that there was people listening, and I think he was talking to his dad, or maybe it was his wife Tammy. But anyway, complaining about the food and passport, and what a shitty place this North Korea was. And from what Scott told me was phone went dead, and a few minutes later there was a knock on the door, and we all were assigned a translator, but they weren't really translators, right? They were like Secret Service people, I think there was a couple guys behind him. I think they were armed, and they kind of asked him, "So why do you dislike our country so much?" or something to that word. Scott can tell you when you interview him. But I think his room was never cleaned after that. I did let him know that they didn't like what he said. And knowing that what happened to some of the people in North Korea after we've been there, the kid that stole the poster and all that stuff, who ended up dying, I think Scott was lucky to get home.
And I read in Ric Flair's book that he seemed to indicate that a lot of the fans were almost forced to come watch.
Well, I don't know, and all I know is that there was 2 television channels in our hotel room. One was all propaganda of Kim Sung-il, which was Kim Jong-un's dad at the time. Propaganda about how North Korea has defeated, Japanese in World War II, and United States and Korean conflict, and their history is a little different than ours, obviously. And then you had another channel that was nothing but professional wrestling.
Oh, really?
Let me tell you how big the whole thing was. The money, when we exchanged our money, had Antonio Inoki and professional wrestler on it. They printed money just for us, for that whole country had to use our money. And I asked why that was, and they didn't really give me a straight answer from the North Korean representative. But if you really think about it, it was so that they can control our dollar. So when we exchanged it, we didn't exchange it with their current currency, but with this new currency just made for us, so they can make sure that the dollar that we gave to that country, make sure it ended up in the government's hand.
I see.
So it was, that's how big the whole thing was. I mean, if you saw the video of Collision in Korea, you saw that in the stadium where we performed, there was picture of these flip cards.
Yeah.
Of these missile flying, it's like a pixel, right? Each one of these little kid had a pixel of television, if you can imagine, on your television. Each pixel was these little kids flipping these cards. So the missile would fly off and, destroy, building in America and that kind of thing, And if you see the video, you'll see it. They told me they practiced for 6 months just for our event. So you can imagine how big this thing was, right? And to answer your question about what it said in Ric Flair's book, I know they didn't pay for the ticket, likely. Do they have to be there? They were probably invited to be there, and the way the country works is they're probably better show up kind of thing. So yeah, Rick is probably right to a certain degree, but you got to understand, you if you're North Korean, you're just trying to survive, right? And the government plays a big part of your life, and you're actually going to get a holiday to go watch wrestling for 2 days. Would you want to be working, or would you want to be able to go sit and watch something that you don't get opportunity to see? So there was some what Ric Flair says true, but I'm sure there was these guys, they probably didn't sell that event as entertainment. It was more of competition between great evil American versus Asian guys who represented from New Japan, who Korean people I'm sure identify with. So Antonio Inoki, who had a great relationship with North Korean government, physically competing against what represents all the things wrong with the United States. Ric Flair and his gown and his entrance and blonde hair and grand disc of Ric Flair. I'm sure it was a great show, and of course Antonio Inoki goes over on that match, and but Ric Flair was graceful in his defeat, and it was a great happy ending certainly for the audience. It was a great payoff, and so.
Was it originally supposed to be Hogan, and Hogan didn't want to go, so they sent Flair?
Yeah, I guess so. But certainly there was nothing lost by Ric Flair being there, and I don't know if Rick wanted to be there.
According to his book, no.
Probably not, right?
He also mentioned that Muhammad Ali was getting a little testy towards the end there, and he actually started talking normally at a few points, and he was worried about getting.
Well, I'll tell you funny, and I'll show you a picture a little bit later. So we went to visit. They take us to these propaganda visits, right? Cameras. And by the way, you have this great camera and lighting here. Eric Bischoff and I was together most of the time, and we had this lady Secret Service / translator that was assigned to us, and we would go to these various events. They have the Gate of Triumph in France,
yeah.
in Paris. They have their version of that there, but it's the carving and monuments on the wall is North Korean citizen defeating the evil American and Japanese, happen to be we're two of their greatest enemies, and they would ask us, was that in the background? They would stick a mic in my face, but their camera is guys literally doing this, and the lights that we have here are nothing like these lights. They're actually light bulb with the battery pack on a guy, because technology hasn't gotten there. Mind you, this is many years ago as well. So the guy's battery packs are like a Batman's utility packs, and one camera guy actually rolling the film, and that was the technology.
That's in the 96 or so.
Right, yeah, but we're still in 1954 technology, right? And they would ask us questions. They would kind of bait us, right? And the question to me was, since they knew I was from Japanese born, so they would ask me like, so Sonny, don't you think that Japanese government should pay for the atrocity that they have committed against our country during the World War II? And knowing that I was going to get asked a question like that, so Eric and I were smart enough to go, and my standard answer was, I'm born, 54, so I was not involved in, I don't have any experience of that, and I live in Iowa. That was my standard answer. Certainly you don't want to, say things that certainly offend them, and, I wanted to get home, so we were smart enough for that. And they would ask Eric, I remember one point, they would ask Eric a question like, United States government has dropped one bomb for each citizen of North Korea. And don't you think, and it was the same question, don't you think Americans should repay for the damage done to the American or the Korean citizen? And Eric had his answer, and, war is terrible, I can't remember what he exactly said, but, he was smart enough to, kind of fade the heat, as we say in the business. So it was like that. But getting back to so they would take us to one of I think we went to visit Riki Dozan's home where he was born.
He was actually Korean.
Yeah. So we went to visit, and old home, kind of like a historical thing. And as I'm walking back, I feel this in the back of my head. I go, what the hell? I turn around. It's Muhammad Ali jabbing me in the back of my head. So I, champ, you want some of this? Then actually there's a picture, I have it here somewhere, of me and him squaring off. The Eric Bischoff snapped off a couple of pictures of me and Ali snapping, getting ready to go. I said, so me talking some of these. And Ali was so great that when he wanted to talk, when he wanted to be cool, he was all there. He was real sharp. And I think he was sharp all the time. But when he didn't want to talk to you, he was doing that. So, he was working us the whole time, I think.
Worked to his benefit, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just finally on that, do you think everything's going to work out in the end with that whole North Korea situation? Or do you think it's something that we really have to be careful about?
Well, I don't want to get political, but I don't quite understand why certain country can have the bomb and other country can't. And obviously, yeah, it's a scary thing. Japan is the only country that ever had that bomb dropped. So I'm very sensitive to the destruction of a nuclear weapon. But, if they already have it, how do you force somebody to take it down? You know what I mean? How do you do that? And especially when you got a history of people like Gaddafi, who agreed to get rid of their big baseball bat of nuclear weapon, where he ended up. That's probably not a good example. So I'm glad I'm not a politician. That's a hard answer. But I know one thing though. If you're a big guy like you, pick on a little guy like me, and if I only got one bullet, and that's my only bullet, and I have no other way to retaliate, I think that's a scary thought,
And of course, Dennis Rodman might be able to mediate that situation because I guess he's friends with both Trump and the North Korean leader.
Absolutely. I think Eric and Dennis Rodman should get together and work out a coalition since they have, they have a first hand. I tell you how great Eric was. The translator / Secret Service lady. So all these people, I'm sure there's some kind of a ranking that they get, right? And they had this button, a little button, that they all wore on their lapel, and that was picture of Kim Jong Il, and I hope Eric still has it. Eric had, what's the word? Created a relationship the time we were there with our translator that she awarded him with that pin.
Oh, okay.
And I was flabbergasted, right? I mean, however their education system is, America is a great evil, and Japanese is probably number 2 on that list, And Eric has convinced this lady while they were interviewing us, and our little time that we had. She gifted him that pin, and only people she told us to have that pin are, special citizen of North Korea.
I actually heard Eric talk. I think it was the podcast where he had you on either last year or the year before, where he was out for a run and they were so afraid of Americans that they were literally partying.
Wait, yeah, imagine, and you have to imagine this, right? So Mike Chinoy of CNN was there. He was one of the only first foreign reporter that got into North Korea. And we were in our hotel lobby because that's, we couldn't really go anywhere. So that's where we always hang out. And Deborah Wong of ABC News came over to our table and says, "Man, professional wrestling? Really?" She says to us, she goes, "All the time I've been trying to get into North Korea. And they have refused my, request. But I get to come here and cover professional wrestling." She couldn't believe that she got in the country just to cover us. And that's how tight the whole thing was. And I think one of the first day, Eric was at, he is avid runner, and he didn't think anything of it. I think he only got to do it once because they told us he couldn't do it anymore. He put on his shorts and his t-shirt and went out for morning run. And we're downtown Pyongyang, in the city. And what I found out later on and during a week was that these people, it doesn't matter if you worked in a factory, whatever you did, they'd literally march. I mean, like, you come out of your house, another guy come out of their house, and they march to work. I mean, like, together, right? So by the time we got down the street, there'd be like, dozen of people, and they all, their suit might not have a hole in the elbow, but they're all wearing, and they might have been doing it for us. I don't know, but they were, very uniform, and they were, very formal. And imagine you're going to work, and you basically been propaganda and all the news that the evil, Westerners, suddenly the number one enemy being American, and you're walking probably all your life, and you see this guy running towards you. Eric said people parted like he was Moses.